I'm speaking with Josiah Presley, who is an abortion survivor. Abortion is the leading cause of death worldwide, with over 40 million innocent lives taken each year. But some children do in fact survive this attempt on their lives and carry with them every day the marks of this violence which was perpetrated against them. The Abortion Survivors Network estimates that in the US, 1,734 children survive abortions every year. Josiah, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So I'd like to really just dive right in and ask that when did you discover that you are an abortion survivor and what exactly happened to you?
Yeah, so I'm adopted. I'm adopted from South Korea. I've grown up in the United States, in Oklahoma. It's a state right above Texas. And when I was 13 years old, my adopted parents, they decided they thought I was old enough to know a little more about my adoption story and the circumstances that surrounded it. And so they told me about how 2 months into my birth mother's pregnancy with me in Korea, she had a DNC abortion.
Gosh, and how did they know all of this information? Because it sounds incredible that they were given this full profile of you. How did this happen?
Yeah, so it's actually really interesting. The adoption agency that they adopted me through, throughout the process, obviously they send my parents just updates about me, my health records and things like that. And so in some of the reports, there's a report that just basically outlines that information about my birth mother. So she had 2 months pregnancy due to financial difficulties. She underwent a DNC, and then 3 months later found out that realized that she was still pregnant with me. That's actually about the extent of the report that we have, though.
Gosh, and how is it even possible for you to have survived this procedure?
Yeah, so it's really uncommon. It's a pretty typical abortion, or was a pretty typical abortion then. I think a lot of it has to do probably just with the fact that I was only 2 months gestation. And then when we just consider, this is 1995, the very beginning of 1995. So we think about just the differences in the advancements of what we have in modern medicine today, and just the ability of that. When we think about, particularly here in the States, when we think about the pro-choice movement, or when we think about the movement to make abortion legal in the US, one of the major ways they did that was the argument that it's just a clump of cells. And they can make that argument. A lot of the way they can make that argument was just because of the lack of technologies we have as far as sonograms go and 3D ultrasounds and all those sorts of things that we have available now that make it really hard for us to deny the humanity of a child when we see them in the womb. But it also made it a lot easier back then for mistakes to be made, or for them just to not be able to see everything that was going on there.
Gosh, and no doubt, even though you are alive and with us today, did this procedure in any way harm you and have any kind of physical impact on your health?
Yeah, so when I was born with a deformed left arm. You can see it here. Whether or not that was a direct cause of the abortion, we're not positive. But when we consider the type of abortion it is, or it was, we think it's very likely that it's a direct cause of the abortion. A DNC abortion, the doctor goes into the mother's womb and basically rips the baby apart and brings them out in pieces. And so, considering the type of abortion, we think it's very likely. We're not positive. Past the physical deformity I have, there's also a lot of just internal pain from learning this about my parents and their decisions. Growing up as an adopted kid, one of the ways that my parents always framed adoption was in a positive light. they framed it from the perspective of, our birth parents loved us so much and they couldn't take care of us, so they offered us up for adoption. And that's how they showed love to us in that way. At 13 years of age, that was a lot to take in about my story. And then there's a lot of anger that I had then towards my birth parents because I grew up in a pro-life home. I grew up with the understanding that abortion was wrong, that it was taking innocent human life. And so at 13 years of age, for me, there's a lot of anger because my birth parents didn't love me in my mind. They thought my life was so worthless. They tried to take it before I was in place for adoption. There's a lot of hurt there, just that rejection. Again, I blame the fact that I had a deformed arm on them. We don't know for sure, but it's very likely. So I blame that deformity on them, and I figured I was the way I was. I was broken the way I was broken because of the decisions they had made. And so there's a lot of internal turmoil there that I struggled with for a number of years, and I really didn't move past that turmoil until I came to faith in Jesus Christ, till I was saved, and I found life and purpose in Jesus.
Gosh, and I'm really wondering that also before you discovered that you're an abortion survivor, was there anything in your childhood which, any kind of, again, turmoil, mental health impact? Because obviously, even though you didn't know, something truly traumatic had happened to you before you were born as an unborn child. So looking back, is there any signs that you can pick up on?
Well, so sure. I mean, so growing up with a deformed arm, I had a lot of self-image and self-worth issues. I'm just feeling less than others because of my deformity. As an adopted kid, there was the level of rejection I had to face. I always tell people when they think about adoption, when they consider adoption, one of the things that we need to recognize is adoption is a really beautiful thing, but it always comes out of brokenness. And an adopted kid, it doesn't matter how old they were when they were adopted, and at some point in their life, they have to deal with the reality that at some point, the people who should have loved them the most, who should have cared for them the most, their own parents, turned their backs on them. Whether it was, giving them up for adoption in a situation where they knew that they would go to a better home, where they could be taken care of, where they could be loved. It doesn't matter the circumstances surrounding that; they still have to come to grips with the reality of that. And so there was a lot of inner turmoil throughout my childhood because of that. I wouldn't say particularly different than any other adopted kid has to work through, or any other person who has a deformity or a disability has to work through. But it definitely was then exasperated by the reality that my birth parents had an abortion as I got older, and as I came to know that.
And also, I'm wondering about the impact of, the idea that when you realize that, okay, I'm an abortion survivor, that this in and of itself is not something that is talked about in society, even though, as I mentioned at the beginning, there are children who survive these procedures, but this is not something that people know that it happens. And just also for you, when you were growing up, that you had this that was so different from your peers. You had to walk past, they didn't. You had to ask questions. You had to grapple and deal with things that they totally didn't have to. And I would imagine this would be a really kind of lonely, isolating experience. How did you cope with that at such a tender age?
Yeah. So first, when I first learned about it, I did not realize that that was a thing. I did not know abortion survivors uh, were a thing whatsoever. It wasn't until probably I was about 16 or 17 that I actually started to learn more about abortion survivors. In the States, the only ones that were really known of at this time were like Gianna Jensen, And then there's another one, Melissa Oden, who I know very well. Her and another one, Claire Colwell, who for the last handful of years I've really had the joy of knowing and being able to connect with them and find support there. Melissa Oden, she's a founder of the Abortion Survivors Network, and they are ministering to many abortion survivors who are coming forward now. And so that's a great resource if anybody finds themselves in a situation where they're learning that they're an abortion survivor, or if they're wanting to learn more about abortion survivors. The Abortion Survivors Network is a great resource to look up. But really, who the Lord placed and used in my life to help me overcome just the trauma and the pain of my abortion story was really His local church, and my adopted parents. I grew up in the church. I grew up in a strong Christian home, and it was my parents and my church family continually placing the truth of the gospel of Jesus in front of me that changed my life and made the difference. Because as I felt worthless, as I felt like my life had no value, as I felt like I was going nowhere with my life, the gospel changed that, because the gospel showed me a God who valued my life. Who, when I thought my life had no worth, the God of the universe says, my life has worth. When I thought I had no purpose, the God of the universe says, I have a purpose for your life. When I thought I had no value, He said, you have value. And He proved it by sending His Son down to this earth, living the life I could not live, and dying a death that I deserve, to forgive me of my sins, that I might be brought into a relationship with Him. So I found value, I found worth there, I found forgiveness. And as I found forgiveness in Jesus, that also brought forgiveness towards my birth parents in my life. Recognizing I've been forgiven so much, I'm then called to forgive others, and that extends even to my birth parents. And so there was forgiveness there was purpose there, identity there. I realized and I learned that my identity isn't have to be wrapped up in my deformity, but my identity should be wrapped up in my Savior, who gives me a purpose and identity for my life. And so that's really where the change occurred. That's really where I saw transformation. That's where I found healing, is in Jesus.
Yes. And when you say that you arrived at the point of being able to forgive your birth mother, did you ever feel a desire to meet her? And if so, did this happen?
So there's definitely been that desire. That opportunity has not arisen. It was a closed adoption, so I really don't have even that information as far as being able to track them down. I do know from the same report that shared that my birth mother underwent an abortion. It also says that I have an older sister who's just a few years older than me, and so I do know that, you know, there's a mother and a father and even an older sister out there. I haven't had the opportunity to really pursue that. If it arose, I would definitely take that opportunity.
Yes, and you've been referring to these records, which is really astonishing that it's really so chronicled your life, and because this was something that I was wondering about, that I'm sure many people doubt the veracity of all you are saying. I mean, it's just so extraordinary. It's never spoken about. What would your answer be to these people? I mean, would you just say, okay, well, these are official documents, this cannot be denied, or what would you say to them?
I mean, at the end of the day, it does seem it seems crazy, this idea that children would survive abortion. There are more and more out there. There's more and more with even better documentation than what I have. At the end of the day, what I have to go off of is what we've received. Um, and I think at the end of the day, people reject the idea of it, and they try to reject the idea of it because at the heart of the matter, to accept the understanding, it creates such a strong link between the humanity of the unborn, and really that's what we're talking about with abortion, is a dehumanizing of the unborn, to say they are some subhuman, non-human, or not as valuable as born human life, and that's why it's okay to take their life. And what we're faced with when we look at abortion survivors is there's such a direct link right there. We can't deny the humanity of the unborn. And I think that's why many would seek to then, deny the fact that there are abortion survivors. But they're out there, we're out there. And there are many who are even more documented than I am.
Yes, absolutely. And that is definitely why I really wanted to have you on our show and to bring you on, because it really is, as you so brilliantly put it, just such a powerful reminder and evidence of the humanity of these children. And, there are some people who say, yes, these are babies, but, right? And one of these buts is that, we would think that, okay, of course there are situations where biological parents cannot take care of their children. That's why we have adoption, right? But many people have this great problem with adoption, saying, on the one hand, it is a tremendous pain for children not to be with their biological parents on the one hand, and on the other hand, the unbelievable pain of the parents to give up their own flesh and blood. And this is why they say, well, it's better to have an abortion. So what would be your answer to that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there are many options and many responses that are way better than the option of abortion. Like I said, adoption's one of them. I've mentioned, and I mentioned whenever I share my story, I'm one of 10 adopted kids. My family is 12 kids total, but 10 of us are adopted. And there are
Wow.
many out there who are willing to adopt. Throughout history, we've seen that, and we've particularly seen it through the Christians. Christians have historically taken care of orphans, cared for them. The vast majority of resources out there for women in crisis pregnancies are through Christian organizations, through churches. On the flip side of that, I think we could do, as societies, I think we could do a much better job of resourcing parents who feel like they can't take care of these children. We ought to do a better job of resourcing them for when they're in those situations. I think at least where I live in the United States, the argument that there aren't enough resources for parents, I truly believe is a lie, because there are so many pregnancy centers out there to help parents. But even then, just, our country has food stamps. It has different programs for providing food for people who are impoverished. Like, I believe truly, at least here in the United States, that those resources are available. And then to the point of, you made the statement that, for parents thinking it'd be too painful for me to give up my child. And I would say there's no way, as much pain as that'd cause, and that would cause pain. I just had, my wife just had our first child just a couple months
Oh,
ago.
congratulations. Yeah.
Love I have for my little girl, I could not imagine the pain of giving her up. I cannot imagine how much pain and turmoil there would be in my life to cause me to have to go, I need to give this child up. But I can guarantee you that pain and that turmoil is way less than the pain and turmoil you'd have to go through by choosing to then abort your child, choosing to then take the life of your child. There cannot be any comparison to the amount of pain there, I would think.
Yes, and of course it's very important to adequately screen who these children are going to, and you sound like you had the most amazing family. I mean, 8 adopted children. Could you tell a little bit about this family you were adopted into and what it was like growing up there?
Yeah, so my parents, my dad, he's the pastor of worship of the church I grew up in. And so it was his strong both my parents' strong Christian convictions, that led them to have strong pro-life convictions, that led them to living it out through adoption. And they actually came to adopt my first sibling through my mother volunteering at a crisis pregnancy center. And so my parents, they had themselves already had a handful of miscarriages, and so they had their minds thinking towards adoption. But my mom was serving in a crisis pregnancy center, and a woman came in adamant she had to have an abortion. And it was my mother there counseling this woman, and she asked my mother, she said, well, if I keep the child, will you adopt the child? And
Wow.
at that moment, my parents, they were forced with the reality of, okay, we believe life is valuable. We believe all life is valuable. Are we going to really live it out? And they decided
Wow.
they would. And so they adopted my older sister. And from then, they just continued down this road of adopting and adopting. And it's really crazy to see the way the Lord wove my family story together. Whether it be the adoptions they adopted through South Korea, I'm adopted to South Korea. Another sister, not biological, but another sister's adopted to South Korea. They've adopted 2 from Haiti, and they've adopted a number from within the states where I grew up. But whether it be literally them getting a phone call and saying, "Hey, we have a newborn who needs to be adopted," and 2 weeks later they're at an adoption ceremony receiving a 2-week-old baby who we're making our own, or whether it be a long process of them searching out, of them working with an adoption agency. They've been faithful through it all, and the Lord has been faithful to my family through it all. And so it's been crazy. I mean, growing up, 12 kids, uh, 10 of us adopted. My family is all sorts of different colors. I have African American siblings, Haitian siblings, Native American siblings, part Hispanic siblings, Korean siblings, Caucasian siblings. I mean, we're all over the place. But it's been really beautiful to see. It's been really beautiful to see the way the gospel's put on display through it. My family, by no means are we perfect. It is extremely messy. And that tends to be how it is when you put more people into the picture. We're messy, but it's also really beautiful, and it's really redemptive, and it's really awesome to see how God has impacted our family, has impacted other families because of my parents' faithfulness. The last thing I'll say about that, the church I grew up in, they they haven't done it in a couple of years, but they used to have kind of a big Sunday where they just they still have a Sunday every year where they celebrate adoption. But they for a few years they would ask all the families who had adopted just to kind of bring their families forward so the whole church could see them. And the last time I checked, um, in this church there were over 70 adopted kids who had come through this church. And a lot of that was started through my parents' faithfulness, and it just God used that to bring other families in who would look to adopt, or use that as an example to other couples to recognize, hey, maybe God would call us to adopt. And so it's been really awesome to see.
Wow, that's absolutely incredible. And, you know, the other objection I did want to ask you about is the so called unwanted child objection. And it's even just hard putting this question out because I think it's just so horrible the way this is framed in general, because people basically say it's really a very misguided compassion, that it's so terrible to be unwanted that it's better that that child wouldn't live than live that unbelievably traumatizing life. And, you know, you can't think of a more extreme experience of feeling unwanted than when your own parents, well, your mother in this case, you know, wanting to, you know, take your life. So what is your kind of answer to this idea of the unwanted child and abortion, and what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, so I mean, if we want to talk about it in a very like direct manner, a very like just philosophical manner, the reality is us basing a person's value off of how much they are wanted is not a good metric for determining the value of people. Okay, and we do that across the board. So in other words, me saying a person's life isn't valuable if they're not wanted is terrible way to view people. Because what would keep me then from saying, well, why don't I just find so and so who I don't like, and because I don't value them, it's okay for me to just kill them. We would never say that's okay, right? We would, when we look at wars throughout history, when we look at genocides of people, and when it comes down to it, it comes down to one people group saying we don't like that people group, and because we don't value them, we're going to destroy them. We, throughout all of history, we say that is not okay. We do not determine people's value based on whether or not we want them. We have to have an objective standard for the value of human life. And it's either valuable because they're human life, or they're not valuable because they're human life. Now we take that back to the argument for the unborn. We talk about that with children not being wanted. I mean, if we look at examples throughout history, we see throughout all of history, we see many people rise up out of situations where they were not wanted, rise up out of immense difficulty, immense hardship, and we still see them lead very awesome, joyful, fulfilling lives. And so that's not our place to choose whether or not their life's valuable based on whether or not they're wanted. I think there's also another reality, and I would also argue this, that they are wanted. I would argue that every human life is wanted by its creator, by the God of the universe who loves them, who cares for them, who has a plan for them. In Psalm 139, it talks about this. The psalmist says, "For you form my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there had been none." We find this reality that every human life is valuable in the eyes of its creator. And so there isn't, in very real way, there isn't any case of an unwanted child in these ways. But we also see it, I think, throughout society. People do care, and they ought to care. But again, like us making the argument, if they're unwanted, that means they're unvaluable. That's a bad way for us to approach the value of human life. Because if that's the case, if that's how we really want to approach it, all throughout history, we should go back and we should be not so angry with certain people who devalued other human beings because they weren't wanted.
Yeah, for sure. And, another interesting thing is that I heard you say in a speech that discovering that you are an abortion survivor, and then the whole process of processing it and healing has been the most character building experience you have gone through. Could you elaborate on what you meant by that?
Yeah, so it's been extremely character building because at the end of the day, it caused me to hit rock bottom. Like realizing and finding out that I was an abortion survivor caused me to hit rock bottom in my life. I was struggling with self-image issues. I was struggling with self-worth. And when I found out I was an abortion survivor, it basically took it all and said, here's the proof that you have no value in your life, that your life is worthless. And in that hitting rock bottom, that's also where I was met by my Savior. That's where Jesus met me. That's where Jesus saved me. That's where Jesus showed me that even if I hit rock bottom, at the end of the day, like my value, my worth is not tied up in what I do, what I accomplish, or what even I think my value is. My value and my worth is tied up in the value and worth that my creator has assigned to me. That the God of the universe would say my life is valuable and my life has worth. And through that, finding that identity, finding that purpose, it completely changed the trajectory of my life. It was in that calling and finding that identity that the Lord then also used it to call me into ministry. That's what I do. I'm a youth minister. I serve in a church alongside the pro-life advocacy that I do. He called me into pro-life advocacy, sharing my story. I've been sharing my story since I was 16, 17 years old. And I can guarantee you the ability to share my story, the willingness to, the just me being able to do that and being willing to do that is not something in and of myself. And it definitely comes from the calling that I believe my creator has placed on my life to be a voice for life.
Yes, that's absolutely incredible. And, I really think that people underestimate the strength in us to really overcome these awful knocks in life, right? Either through, the consequences of bad decisions we've made, or just unfair things that are not our fault, right? And that we can heal and overcome. This isn't the end of the story. And your life is such a testament to this, because you were so wronged and wounded by what happened to you, that you were able to heal. You found the good things in life, and you built the life that you wanted. And I think this is what we need to be focusing on as a society, is really, helping people in difficult situations thrive, not saying that they, should not be alive because they are struggling, but giving them that help they need so that they can then thrive and become who they are meant to be, right? Which is, as you said, we're not defined by the difficulties we face, right? And thank you so much for sharing your really powerful story today. I'm really excited for our viewers to hear it.
Thanks for having me.